So this podcast is going to dive deep into two key principles to where chiropractic fits in for your child's healing journey, for the clinical understanding of it, and for how you communicate it to patients that you serve.
All right, chiropractors and chiropractic students, welcome to the Family Practice Podcast. You know, the one you've been waiting way too long for, because this podcast will actually stay focused on chiropractic. Not only what it takes to get world-class clinical results for kids and families in your community, but also what it takes to build a legendary, incredible family practice that takes care of your family way beyond your dreams. I'm Dr. Tony Ebel, and I'll be joined by Dr. Matt Hill, Dr. Ellie Wright, Jackie Jakubowicz, and incredible guests, chiros, associates, CAs, all these folks making massive impact around the world. We're going to cover everything: pediatric, perinatal, family practice. This is the podcast you've been waiting for, because moms and dads and families have always needed us. Now they're finally ready for us. I hope you're ready for the Family Practice Podcast. Let's go.
Hello all, and welcome to the Family Practice Podcast. I'm Dr. Matt Hill. I'm excited to host you today and to dig into a very important topic. This podcast is all designed to help you as a clinician, as a chiropractor, but also to help you communicate that to your patients. And this is no doubt a question that you have heard somewhere along the line of a patient's journey, where a parent is asked, where does chiropractic fit in with the other therapies we are already doing? Now, this is a really deep question, so I want to dig into this, because this isn't just for parents to communicate, but it's also for us and for our own understanding of it. So we're going to dive into this. We're going to share a lot of science. We're going to get into a lot of the details of it, a lot of the communication. But likely, when you look at it from a patient side, a mom or dad found your office maybe through a workshop, referral, webinar, social media. And from what they gathered, sounds like you can help them, right? We've all been there. But they're already doing all of the things. They're in PT, they're in OT, they're in speech, they're doing these brain balance exercises, they're changing their diet, they're doing so much, and they're just wondering, okay, I see this new thing, I've seen you, how can it help? So before they even enter your doors, whether they verbalize or not, they're already thinking, how in the world would I have time to add something else? Does this fit in with anything I'm already doing? Or do I need to replace something we're already doing? Now, on the flip side of this, from a doctor perspective, across the adjusting table, if you will, we're the chiropractor, and we might be in the middle of a care plan. We might have seen some awesome improvements, but if they haven't received or achieved that really big breakthrough in, say, speech, socialization, maybe it's a tough thing like seizures, in our head, we start to wonder, do we need something else? Is it going to take more time? Am I doing all I can to help this child to heal? And because that's our job as chiropractors, right? We want to be the most amazing clinicians, have awesome clinical results. We have massive hearts. We care so much. So having thoughts like these makes sense. But we are very similar to parents in that situation, and we want to make sure we're doing everything we can. But the downfall of dwelling on these questions for us, they can lead us into distraction, dilution, doing too much too soon. And this is very similar to that mom and dad. So we've got to learn it in our hearts first and then be able to communicate this. In fact, I could probably call this podcast, Don't Get Clinically Distracted, as it's so easy for parents of patients to focus on the new therapy or the new things that they promote that are going to promise healing. And the same holds true for us docs, right? We think of that new shiny technique, modality, outside-in approach. That's going to help us get the results, right? But what we all want to do is we all want to go fast. We want to see change quickly. We want to get the results. It's not easy to wait, right? When healing takes time and goes through that sequence. And if we're honest with ourselves, when we feel like it's going too slow, we want to do more. So this podcast is just for that. It's that it's okay for you as a clinician to feel this way, but we want you to know the science. We want you to be able to communicate that in true chiropractic language, that it might be okay to feel this way, but it's not okay to function this way, right? We all put an emphasis on function over feeling. So this podcast is going to dive deep into two key principles to where chiropractic fits in for your child's healing journey, for the clinical understanding of it, and for how you communicate it to patients that you serve. This has helped me along the way, and I'm going to share my son's story because it helps so much to look at this, not only from a parent's perspective, but then we'll dig in specifically looking at the sequence of development, neurology, why chiropractic isn't just that piece of the puzzle, but the piece of the puzzle, the foundation, if you will, that all else could be built on. Sounds pretty good, right? Because that's what we want. And that's what not only we want to feel as chiropractors, but we also want to be able to communicate that to our patients. So we're going to look a lot of that science data and the measurements of it that we can make through chiropractic. But first, I want to share my story about my son, Micah, who is now 14 years old. 14 years ago, he was born a month early by emergency C-section. And what we later found out, a lot going on, was born with a genetic condition that affected his overall brain development. So Micah was born without the corpus callosum, the middle part of his brain, and he was diagnosed with complete agenesis of that corpus callosum. And he had a large ventricle, so he had a lot of fluid in his brain. Doctors were scared, had to get an MRI right after birth. They were worried about hydrocephalus. So immediately after he's born, emergency C-section, rushed to an MRI. I'm there with him. We're playing the waiting game. Thank God he didn't have hydrocephalus. But we were still worried about, okay, what does this mean? What does this diagnosis mean? And the doctors, they really, as transparent as they could be, they couldn't give us any of the answers other than, here, read this, here's what to expect, just keep going. So because of this and this condition, and then also looking back at Micah's difficult birthing situation with emergency C-section, stress all over the place, extra ultrasounds, tons of prenatal stress, delivery stress, he struggled mightily with nursing, constipation, sleep. We were trying to figure out his diagnosis, but to be honest, Mom and I, Crystal, we're drowning in the day-to-day, right? Like nothing's easy. He's not nursing, he's not eating, he's not pooping, he's colicky. And to compound it all, the neurologists are like, hey, this is what it is. It's the limitations of matter. The brain's not going to develop anymore. A lot of these struggles that you're going through are very, very normal. And so in our mind, they were telling us the best option is just to do nothing and accept it, right? Just wait and see and hope it gets better. So what do? As typical go-getter parents, and like most parents, we were going to prove those doctors wrong. We started looking for anything and everything that can help Micah. He had the lactation consulting. We changed everything up with the diet. Gosh, my wife was a rock star. She's like, could it be something I'm eating? Signed him up for fascial therapy, started PT early. We even traveled to California for a functional intensive with him to look at his motor system. And we even considered going outside the US for those not FDA yet approved procedures, right? But about 2 to 3 months into our journey, a family friend recommended chiropractic care for Micah. And, like a parent, we're going to do all things. And we're like, oh yeah, absolutely, we would do that. I'd seen a chiropractor as a teenager. My wife was holistic. She'd seen a chiropractor before. We're like, let's do it. So we drove over an hour to see Dr. Roger Roberts. He's an old school chiropractor, Palmer graduate, smaller, old school office, but really comforting, like awesome office. And we're like, okay, this is different. Now, I don't remember a whole lot about that day, and nothing we heard that day was particularly memorable other than his conviction. I know chiropractic can help Micah. Now, I'm sure Dr. Roberts did an awesome job in his day 2 report. I just, as a dad, didn't process any of it. I was just looking for the fix. How do we fix what's going on with Micah so we can get to that deeper side of it? We had no clue about what progress looked like, and even less about the nervous system, right? We were very symptom-based as parents. But saying this could help, it was enough to get Mom and I started. Now, about 2 weeks later, we started to notice some really cool changes with Micah. Wasn't constipated anymore, wasn't fussy. He started sleeping. He was taking more by the bottle. He was nursing better. He was going down quicker. And he didn't need to fall asleep on us and stay asleep us. So we could be like, hey, goodbye lactation consultant. Life's a little bit easier. we can breathe a little bit. But then there's me, typical dad. I'm going to throw myself under the bus here. I'm still really skeptical. And I'm like, is this all because of chiropractic that things are getting better? Because I know we've done a lot. You've changed your diet. He's going to a lot of other therapies. But thank God Crystal was not as hard-headed as I was. And she was like, you need to just be quiet. This is from chiropractic. This is the one thing we changed, and it made a huge difference. So we were hooked. We needed to find a chiropractor a little bit closer to home because we were driving about an hour and a half each way to get there, so we could double down on this as soon as possible. And this is our intro into the chiropractic journey that actually led me into becoming a chiropractor. Now, for me, while Dr. Roberts and we saw Dr. Tompkins, we saw Dr. Tony, obviously, I work with Dr. Tony now, they were all very convincing about why chiropractic was that missing piece and where chiropractic fit in. But with me being a dad and loving the analytics, I still had to ask myself, okay, why did chiropractic work? Were the results that I experienced with Micah common? Why did chiropractic work more so than the other therapies we tried? And then most importantly, why is it such a secret? Why didn't more families know about chiropractic? And that's why I really want to take the rest of this podcast and unpack that, because I think those questions are so key to answer that question of where chiropractic fits in clinically for us as the doctor, and clearly to communicate it to patients. All right, so you're ready to go. Let's do this. Let's take 12 years, well, actually 14 years now, of my understanding of chiropractic, and we're going to put it in to this podcast episode here. So principle number one, to be able to answer that question, where does chiropractic fit in? We have to understand and communicate what I call the hierarchy of healing. Now, while today's most advanced neuroscientists, research experts, they explain the process of neurodevelopment in very intricate details. Now, I'm not going to do that today. Oftentimes, that can only serve to complicate things. To be effective at how we apply this clinically in our care protocols and communicate with parents, we really have to keep it simple. So with this in mind, I want to take the complicated process of neurodevelopment and simplify it into these, call it 3 sequential stages with a quick explanation of each. That's going to show you this hierarchy. Now, I find the best ways to visualize these sequential stages is like a pyramid. So if you're following along, if you're not on a run or you're not working out, listen to this, or you're not driving while listening to this, draw this out in your notebook. Draw a pyramid. And this number one thing I'm going to talk about is the base of that pyramid, and the rest is going to stack above it. All right, so you've got your pyramid. Let's dive in. Stage 1, the autonomic and central nervous system, and you can write that in the bottom of that pyramid, is the foundation of that pyramid. And I want to break down the autonomic and central nervous system, and then we'll show you where that pathway gets off and how it can affect children neurodevelopmentally. So Dr. Bruce Lipton, awesome cellular biologist. I think he teaches at the New Zealand Chiropractic College now. Researcher. We have him in posters in our office, and he has this quote, and I always base my care, my science, my everything on this. The function of the nervous system is to perceive or intake the environment and coordinate the behavior of all other cells. So in this quote, the nervous system's function is to perceive the environment, right? The sensory system. It's meant to coordinate that. The brain's meant to work on it and then respond to all the other cells. The base of our health pyramid is truly the nervous system, which we can also call the autonomic or central nervous system interchangeably. Without a doubt, the foundation of our health is that nervous system. So it makes perfect sense that what's called the neural tube is the very first thing that develops for kiddos in utero, for those little babies, serving as the first components of the brainstem, the autonomic nervous system. And from the first moments of life, the nervous system starts to control and coordinate not only the basic functions like heartbeat, lungs, food, digestion, assimilating, but also neurological development from that point forward. It's really cool when you read the research on this and you find out that the sympathetic nervous system starts to develop at about 6 weeks in utero. The parasympathetic start to show form 8 weeks in utero, right? And even before, a lot of times, a new mom will know she's even pregnant. That nervous system is already starting to develop and already starting to build a foundation on what everything else is built on, right? Because the nervous system is going to control all the other systems, right? The digestive system, the respiratory system, the hormonal system, all of that, what goes on in the body is controlled by what the nervous system does. So jumping straight to the takeaway on this, in order to generate true sequential healing, we have to first ensure that nervous system function regulation is activated and optimized. If we don't do this first, everything else is limited in what we do. So if you followed us through PX and through, trainings and the live videos I do and all those things, we talk so much about that balance between the sympathetics and the parasympathetic nervous system, right? The balance of the CNS. What is the gas versus brake? And it might sound simple, but if that's not balanced, the communication to the brain, to every single system of the body, is going to not communicate well. It's going to be subluxated, the word that we use. And if it's subluxated at that point, then how is it going to control the systems of the body? And how then are the systems going to impact the outward symptoms of it? Remember in Bruce Lipton's quote, right? The nervous system perceives what's going on, it's going to coordinate it, and then it's going to respond. And if that CNS autonomic nervous system is not in a good place, at the very root foundational part of it, if there's subluxation, you are going to get an altered, inefficient response very, very early on throughout the birth process. And that was the case with Micah. That's why that first stage foundation had to be so strong. And that went when it wasn't so strong, again, to jump ahead to the answer of this, that's why a lot of the other therapies weren't quite working as well, because there wasn't great balance in the autonomic system. So the autonomics, the central nervous system, develops that good balance, that good efficiency first, even before birth. Then what awesomely happens when a baby's born, right? Sympathetic surge, right? To get them breathing and adjusting. And then that surge could level out. And that's when you've got that happy baby that's eating, sleeping, pooping, doing all the really good things that we know is just awesome for function. And then growing and developing at ease and putting the next stages on it. And that's where we get into stage 2 of this pyramid. So if you've got the autonomic nervous system on the base, the foundation that has to be balanced, very shortly after this, the motor system starts to develop. And the motor system is very, very connected by way of the spinal tracts into this sensory system. So that second stage 2, right above autonomic nervous system, you can put motor sensory system. The second stage of this hierarchy really includes that neuromuscular response. And the balance and coordination we have in that comes from the brain and to the body. So think about it like this. A baby comes, comes into the world, right? And the first thing they're designed to do is they're designed to really have that rooting reflex, right? Where they find mom and they nurse, right? So important, skin to skin. Baby starts to nurse. What are they activating? They're activating the motor system. They're activating their latch, their suck, their swallow. They're activating that, yes, in those primitive reflex ways, but they're also learning from that to coordinate the rest of movements upon that. What comes after that, right? And this is obviously very much generalizing, but from those small motor movements in the mouth and the tongue and the swallow and all the smooth muscle to help them digest that breast milk. After that, they start to learn head control. They start to learn thoracic control. They start to be able to, cross crawl and do those kind of things and get more stable. So all of those things build upon what they start with. Now, everything in life is tied to this movement. And I guarantee you, maybe you're not a pediatric-based chiropractor, or maybe you just haven't, seen a lot of kids yet. You probably use the phrase movement is life with your patients, right? Like I see a ton of wellness patients and they're like, what should I do? Move, right? Moving is so good. it's perfect for babies too, right? If you had the masterclass of this, as many of us did in school or post-grad work, like movement is what is so important to life. And it's the same thing with babies. That motor system very much helps calm and integrate the sensory system as well. So if you have a kiddo who is delayed, uncoordinated, inefficient on those motor milestones, they're also likely going to struggle with the sensory system later on as that starts to develop. Now, if you've had the masterclass and this is a little bit of a side, in school, post-grad about the gut health, right? Microbiome and its role in the brain and nervous system function, you're probably wondering, okay, Matt, why did you put motor sensory system and we haven't even talked about the gut? I promise you that's important. And there's more about that in the next phase. But truth is, for a developing child, movement is 10 times more important than gut health because of the essential role in stimulating and organizing the brain and nervous system development. One of the coolest things that the brain is wired to do through the cerebellum is to activate other things. Like you activate eyesight through head control. You activate visual coordination and accommodation by cross-crawling. So that motor system is so key. And so often it's easy to overlook from a medical standpoint, right? How many pediatricians have probably checked the box on a lot of kids that we see come into our office that are struggling with the perfect storm that aren't really coordinated, that they can run, but it's not pretty. They're very asymmetrical in that run. They're holding their shoulders up like this. They might be on their toes, but they got the box checked that movement's okay. But they are not great and coordinated with motor development. And remember what we talked about in that quote, what's going on here matters to the brain and the response matters too. So you get a dyskinetic child that struggles with a lot of noisy, uncoordinated, disorganized movement. You're going to get that coming out later on, either to the systems of the body or emotionally and behaviorally when they hit 5, 6, 7, and we put a lot more on their plate socially with school. Now, obviously, I'm talking a lot about the motor system and how it's tied to that sensory system. But if that movement system goes right, it allows the gut and the other functions on the inside to take place at a better piece of it. See, I told you I would not leave the gut out. It's so true that a baby around 6 months, when he starts moving more, that's when he's ready for more, he or she is ready for more solid foods, right? Because that movement helps with motility, absorption, assimilation. All of those things have to strengthen and have to grow and have to learn and have to develop, right? If you've ever eaten a big unhealthy meal at an airport, right, and then got stuck on a plane, aka not moving for hours afterward, how did that make you feel? Not great, right? Now imagine that you're a child whose emotional cognitive development is still very much in process, and now both your body motor and gut are limited to not moving well or functioning really well and pushing it through. How do we expect them to respond, right? Behavior is going to be off. They're not going to feel great. Emotionally, it's going to be just tough. So movement is absolutely life. And muscles can't move themselves. The nervous system has to coordinate and control it. And so the tone and coordination of the nervous system must develop and function properly first in order for the tone and coordination of the muscles to then develop the smooth muscles and everything else after that. Now, I could continue to go on with this because this is so key, but what I want to emphasize for you as chiropractors, listen to this, is do not underemphasize things that a child comes in. He's got a weak core. He might be spastic in his movements, balance problems. He's stimming, toe walking, discoordinated. He walks from the playroom to your adjustment. If there's movement-based challenges like that, and he's had physical therapy, occupational therapy, all those things, and they're trying to address that, but they can't, you've got to take a step back and say, okay, what does the nervous system fit into this? Remember, it's the neuromuscular system. The nervous system controls it. So how do we help him to be able to help him or her be able to unstuck that subluxated, dysfunctional, uncoordinated system so that way they can start to integrate and coordinate those movements? That's why the motor system works so importantly. So if you're drawing that triangle and you've got that motor sensory system there, think about it as you're building a house right now. You've got that good foundation with it. And now that motor system is very much the framing of it. You're putting that framing together to say, okay, here's what I've got. I've got to have this be balanced, secure, safe. Then we can go to work on the plumbing, the gut, which is similar to like the HVAC, the respiratory, the electrical, all the brain-based things after that. And this is especially true for kiddos who have regressed with motor development or gut health or all of those things. You have to go back before you go forward, and you have to look at the motor system, the motor sensory system first, and clean that up if you haven't even went back further and cleaned up that autonomic nervous system. All right, so we've got our two levels, and I hope I emphasize that enough that that is a key piece of the puzzle. If you go to the autonomic, if you jump steps with this, you're only going to get bogged down. So stage 3, if you've got your autonomics on the bottom, you've got your motor sensory system right above it, now is the time to put gut and immune health. All right. Everything we learned in chiropractic school and post-grad, it matters, right? Healthy food, healthy gut, healthy life, all of these things. The third stage in this hierarchy is gut health. Now, I may have pushed this lower than you thought, but it still is absolutely pivotal. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but the gut is connected to both the immune system and to the brain. Now, most natural health approaches this as probably the first step, and that's where I want to contrast this. And even some chiropractors included, I want to remind you again, that motor system and that autonomic system has to come before it, right? If you have a subluxated 5-year-old that is super wound up, running across the room, raging bull, won't stop, and you try to change his diet and get him to take supplements, he's going to throw those right back at you. So I like to think about it this way. The trunk of the treehouse is the gut, the immune system, and the respiration system. Oxygenation, right? You've got the endocrine system in there, and you've got the motor system, right? Those are the tree trunks to it. I know we rank motor system ahead of it, but these things on a big tier level, those are the keys to get the healthy expression of that tree, right? So if you're past that motor sensory, you've got to make sure that gut health is good, the processing is good, the motility is good, and that's going to lead that tree to having healthy function, right? Green leaves as opposed to brown leaves are struggling to get nutrients, right? But even more vital to the overall expression of that tree is the root system. And in this analogy, the roots are the nervous system. So chiropractors, don't feel like you have to affect the gut and the immune system simply from an outside-in approach. When you're adjusting, how you're adjusting, when you're making change in the body, you are affecting that root system. And this is so key for parents too, because if they're asking you this question of where does chiropractic fit in, it's likely they've done a number of things, and that includes supplements, it includes diet changes, it includes all those things. And they're like, well, shoot, we did all these things and they didn't help us one bit. Does that mean we should just throw those out and replace them with chiropractic? Absolutely not. But if you don't have the autonomic nervous system to back that up, they're likely not working. So once we start a care plan, once we start adjusting, once we start making change, how awesome is it that they're going to be able to assimilate those things and they're going to make a big difference with that. So that's why it's so important to go in sequence, go in this hierarchy, because if we can help that gut-brain connection from a neuro sense of it, that's going to help the body be able to process all of those things they may have done in the past and be feeling like they don't work, and now they need to work. And honestly, this is such a big win for parents too, because parents, they've done this. They feel like, gosh, I've tried all these things for years. What's the missing link to it? I just don't get it. Well, it's just not the gut alone. The brain and the nervous system have to come along with it, because that brain-gut connection is more powerful than just that gut-brain connection, right? It goes both ways. The safety pin cycle, they communicate in both ways. So there's a massive connection between that brain-gut and that immune function. So the other thing to remember with this, when you communicate it with patients, and even to think about it in yourself, And this is where that modulation of inflammation comes in. Inflammation, mucus production, a lot of these kick the sick kiddos, very, very just struggling with a lot of gut health. But if there's a lot of underneath the surface sympathetic dominance struggles there, they're always going to be in that perpetual subluxation pattern. If they're stuck in that sympathetic fight or flight overdrive, they're going to suppress immune function. So no matter what you do for the gut, it's likely they're still going to get into these struggles. And that's why go back to the base, go back to that autonomic system function, because that is going to help them the absolute most. Now, when we go to the very top of this pyramid, which we've been getting to, in simplicity and ease, we look at the brain. I call it the brain or the cognitive development tools. These are the things you get to last. And, it's hard because a lot of times parents want to get to these things first, right? You see a kiddo that's struggling with speech, they're struggling with cognition, memory, behavior, focus, attention, all of these things. Parents are like, man, we need this to come first. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. Those are actually the last step in an efficient autonomic nervous system, motor sensory system, and then gut, immune, and digestive system. So there is so much that needs to take place to be able to get to that point where then we can see the results of this. And that's why I really call it a sequence. So after the basics of development, eat, sleep, poop, figure all those out, develop, grow, we start to see the big stuff come online, right? Speech, communication, emotional regulation, central processing gets easier, decision-making, focus, cognition, and so forth. Keeping it extra simple for parents is key with this. I like to say there's two stages to it. You can almost communicate them like this. There's a body and brain developmental stages. The body needs to go first. Eating, breathing, digestion, movement, immune function, and so forth. But once these body basics are online and functioning, the more advanced brain development starts to kick in. Speech, communication, socialization, cognition, behavioral, all of those things. And how incredibly authentic is that for us chiropractors, right? Because we get into this trap that patients come to us and they say, hey, I want help with fixing this. I want you to take care of this symptom. We know we don't do that. We're not treating symptoms here. We're caring for the nervous system. And so that allows us a sequence to say, well, what I can tell you is going back is we've got to get through this hierarchy more, because there's all these things going on that happened earlier on that they're struggling with, that they need help with before their brains and bodies can connect to start doing these bigger things with it. So that's why it's so important to look at it in a sequence and not just, okay, here's the symptom. This is what we're going after. So that's the hierarchy of healing. If you've got that triangle completed, you've got the bottom, that's the ANS, the autonomic nervous system. Next is the motor sensory system. Above that is the gut, immune, inflammation side of it. And at the very top is those brain-based functions. The more you can draw this out for your patients on a whiteboard, the more you can do it in a day 2 is very much going to help them see where chiropractic fits in, because we do the most to help that ANS, autonomic nervous system, central nervous system development, which is the foundation of it all. So this leads me to principle number 2. Then they're asking you, okay, well, does my child struggle with that? So you've got to have a way to quantify and to communicate the improvement within that autonomic or central nervous system. So if you understand that correct order of stages, you've got to show it to them, not only in that first scan, but you got to show them the improvement they're making, right? This is not unique to us. I think this is unique in every single process or things, people do, right? You go to the dentist, they have to do something, right? To show you, okay, here's the progress we did. Heck, you get your roof done. They show you, here's the old shingle, here's the new shingle. Like, we can look at neurology so intricately. And this is one of my favorite things to do, is to show that. Because parents oftentimes, they just can't see the forest between the trees, right? And so our job, awesome job as a neurologically focused chiropractor, is go up to 30,000 feet and say, okay, here's what we can use to look at to see an objective picture of that nervous system. So in PX offices, in my office, we use the neurologically based insight scans. These help parents to see just objectively where their nervous system is and put those together with the subjective side of it, the softer signs within their child's life. And what I want to do here is, if you've never heard of these scans, or even if you have heard of these scans, I want to get a little nerdy. I don't have my glasses on me today, but I want to get nerdy and I want to unpack the objective side of things through the insight scans. Because I think when you look at them through this, and this could really be a whole podcast in itself, but it'll help us dabble on the surface to see clinically what we can find objectively that matters so much. Just like, all the mantras just that have been drilled into us, right? Function matters more than feeling. Function matters more than feeling. This is that. This shows us the function of the nervous system, right? Because traditional medicine, primarily on symptoms. They look for pathology, standard exams, blood work, MRIs, EEGs. The insight exam looks at that central nervous system. Gosh, contrast it with the pediatrician, right? Where they do a growth chart and we're like, whoa, that's awesome. The insight scan's way, way more awesome than a pediatric growth chart. Now, the insight scans, they're all about finding, tracking, understanding whether subluxation and dysautonomy are present. We want to see how significant this is. Is it severe, mild, moderate with intensity? And then where within their nervous system are they primary located, right? Where we can find those primaries where they're struggling. Now, when we utilize the EMG, the thermal scan, the HRV, those allow us to not only quantify that, but it allows us to qualify that stress, especially, not only regionally with the EMG and thermal, but globally with that HRV. And then we can compare and say, okay, here's where this child started with, and here's how we've seen them functionally improve, and look at all the cool things that they have done symptomatically during that time. See how that's tied into that hierarchy. See how cool that is, that their nervous system improvement led them to all those things. See, the nervous system, it's setting that firm foundation for more momentum and future neurological change. But those scans help us know that we're actually getting that momentum functionally within the nervous system. Now, as a bonus, these scans aren't only for us, right? They tangibly show the parents. Now, my favorite story is we take care of an awesome family with a nurse practitioner. And she told me, she said, we showed her the scans for a child. And she's like, I don't know how any mom can see these scans and walk away. These are so powerful because it brings the conversation back to the root cause. It brings it back to neurology. And at Chiropractic, if you have marketed, shared, communicated your practice that you are all about the nervous system, that we are all about stage one in that hierarchy of healing. There is no one better in the world that can help that nervous system than a care plan with a principled chiropractic adjustment. Now, when we quantify improvements with the scan, this is where we want to take a turn with parents, and I call it building a bridge. Because yes, they care about what the scan's findings are, but they are much more concerned with how their kiddos are doing. Me with Micah, I was like, okay, are we getting a result? That's important. This is where we start to talk about what we call softer signs. Now, this can also be known as symptoms, right? And if you grew up in a very principled chiropractic world, symptoms are a very scary word, right? I remember getting adjusted at a principled chiropractor's office, and I was like, oh man, I feel so good. And they're like, I don't care how you feel. It doesn't matter. It's all about function, right? And so we've got to build a bridge, because if you say that to a parent of a perfect storm child, they're not going to quite handle that the same as I would as a chiropractic student. But truth is, symptoms can be useful in identifying the dysfunction or the healing of systems in the body. So I want you to map this out, is think about it like this. We know the nervous system's the master controller, right? But we know that nervous system controls different systems of the body. Those different systems have different organs and communication pathways that they are attached to. Those organs all produce a result or a response which is the symptom. So if you just track that backwards with the symptom, you can look at, okay, well, this symptom's coming out, this organ's struggling, so this system's probably struggling, so the nervous system and communication are struggling. Right there, you've solved your dilemma to say, okay, it's okay to look at that because that's bringing me back to the nervous system. Now, consider a newborn baby. They have 3 main functions that rule their life. We mentioned this before: eating, sleeping, and pooping. Now, what happens if one of those functions go haywire? Massive struggle, right? If a baby can't nurse, digest, or they just don't want to sleep and they're colicky, it's not just the babies are stressed, but the parents are a mess too. So before we improved the advanced functions of development, movement, social, emotional, sensory, we have to go back to those 3 main functions, the softer signs of it. It's going to continue to affect every other area of advanced development. A constipated child is more emotional. Let's be honest. A tired child gets angry quicker. A picky eater, their sensory system is just more wound up. It's just the science of it. And we could give a lot more examples, but the take-home point here is softer signs are the developmental building blocks all else is built on. So as doctors, we have to be listening for those neurological soft signs, eating, sleeping, pooping to change and improvement happening, and then looking for those things in office. Are they more calm? Are they more relaxed? Are they moving more smoothly? Are they moving more confidently? How is rotation and relaxation of their shoulders and movement of their body. All of those are key to then communicate to parents that, hey, not only are you seeing these awesome softer signs, we are too. And then helping them see that those changes came from the nervous system, because that's where chiropractic fits in for them. It's making that change to the nervous system, which is going to massively compound and achieve bigger changes in their goals and outcomes of everything else they're doing as momentum is gained. Now, it's often said in the marketing world that what's even more important than the product is the organization and presentation of it. And I think this very well is summarized in this podcast, right? As pediatric chiropractors in a family practice, we can know it, right? We can know all the science. We can have all the details. We can talk about the spinal tracts, right? And go back to CNS class. But if parents can't understand it, that's where we can't build the bridge. So if parents maybe haven't signed up or stuck with care because they didn't know how the healing happens, use a lot of these analogies. If it's taking longer, use these analogies. If they're struggling to say, hey, what should I choose in this season of my life? Should we go more into PT? Should we look at more gut health? Do we need to double down on chiropractic care? Likely, that's probably where you need to go. That's where this podcast can help you, because that's going to point them in that sequence to help them see where chiropractic fits in. Because chiropractic is not just one of the puzzle pieces. It is the puzzle piece where it fits in, right? And so I pray this podcast helps you do just that. Understand and apply the order in which healing happens. Spend a longer time on that autonomic nervous system than anything above it, because that is going to be the progress to patients. So homework for you, chiropractors, use these analogies, draw the triangle, walk parents through why they're seeing what they're seeing, not only in scans, but in your communication, and they will better understand that role of neurologically focused chiropractic care as a precursor to the results they are looking for, because that's really where you can get miracles to happen in your practice. So real quick as we close, just want to recap some of the keys from this. Chiropractic, it's not another piece of the puzzle. It's the foundation of it in that pyramid. Use that hierarchy of healing. That is important to get started with the nervous system, and then use those scans and those neurological findings to quantify progress and communicate it with parents. If you use these things, you are going to be able to make awesome change with children. You're going to have parents that are all on board like myself. Heck, they might go to chiropractic school. They might tell their whole neighborhood and their whole family about chiropractic. And that is absolutely changing lives. So if this communication style, if this podcast helped you, gosh, I would love for you to share this with your fellow chiropractors. This is what we want to do to help the profession be able to communicate this more to parents, to just emphasize that chiropractic is the piece of missing momentum. Take care. God bless. Love y'all. Thanks for listening.
Hey, Dr. Tony here, and I wanted to say thank you for listening to the Family Practice Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, like and subscribe to the show so you don't miss a thing. Also, if you're looking for more content from us, you can absolutely subscribe to our newsletter, watch exclusive episodes on YouTube, and dive deep into the articles and blogs on our website. All of this is linked in today's show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next episode.